The first context I want to discuss is masculine and feminine characteristics of the face. Understand that we're not talking about strict rules, but rather guidelines that are helpful. Something to keep in mind is that men and women are extremely similar anatomically. Sexual dimorphism is the scientific term for analyzing physical differences between the sexes of a species, and for a lot of other species, there are extreme differences between male and female. But for humans, the differences are more subtle, which can make it a tricky task to sculpt both sides of this context successfully, but the information in this video should prove helpful. Here I have two more ref sheets open. On the left, we've got a collage of men's faces, and on the right, a collage of women's faces. Now, in broad terms, masculine facial structure tends to be more rigid and defined, where feminine facial structure tends to be softer and less defined. And you can use that general principle in all of your sculpting decisions. For example, if I zoom in on this guy right here, look at the profile, and zoom in on this lady here. So if I'm sculpting a man, and specifically the jaw, I would lean towards making it a very sharp contour with a distinct point at the corner. Whereas if I'm sculpting a woman, I would soften those features out. If we scoot over to the next face, let's say I'm sculpting the labiomental sulcus in between the bottom lip and the chin. For the man, I would go ahead and define that as a sharp crease. Whereas for the woman, I would smooth it out. It would still be a divot, but a smooth divot. And this kind of thinking can be applied to most features, whether it's the laugh line, the distinction of fat pads. All the anatomy is the same, but the level of definition and rigidity is where I can make my sculpture feel more masculine or more feminine. After all, terms like chiseled or burly can be used to describe a masculine face, whereas curvy or fair is used to describe a feminine face. And keep in mind that there are also secondary factors that play into feminine versus masculine. For example, makeup, right? Women wear makeup more often than men, and the purpose of makeup is to downplay the features, to smooth them out. So when you look at photos of women, most of the time they're going to have makeup on, and their features will look downplayed. However, they don't always wear makeup, and I included a couple pictures at the bottom of women without makeup. And so if you can imagine even the hair being gone on this lady, you can see that the features can pass for masculine or feminine. And this speaks to the reality that men and women's faces are actually more similar than they are different. And similarly, if I scoot over to this guy here, even without makeup, most of his features are very smooth. Now, of course, he's younger, which we will talk about age in another lesson. But if you could swap their hair, I think either of them could pass for masculine or feminine. And so things like makeup and hairstyle do have an effect on the masculine and feminine aesthetic, which don't come into play whenever we're sculpting. We're only dealing with shape specifically. Makeup will come during the texturing phase, and hair also comes later, but I do have something for you when it comes to hair, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So that is my general overview of masculine versus feminine. Again, using that generalization to guide the majority of your sculpting decisions. But to get into the details, I'm going to switch to our man head sculpture, and we will transform this into a woman's head. So first thing I need is to bring up an image editor window in the user interface, and we will load that woman collage just so I can have it handy for reference. And one small thing that's been bugging me about the user interface. So the matte cap I've been using, this brown matte cap, this one is my favorite, and my second favorite is the default studio light. But with both of these matte caps, the edges go to a dark gray, which easily blends in with the dark default Blender 2.8 background. And so that can make it very difficult to see the silhouette explicitly. So I'm going to modify that in my user preferences in the themes 3D view. If we scroll down into theme space, scroll down again, gradient colors. So the background is referred to as the gradient, and we will change that color to a lighter gray. All right, here we go. We may lose some of the sex appeal of the 2.8 dark user interface, but this will make it easier to see the silhouette. Real quick, I want to interject that 80 Burrows showed me a much more convenient way to change the viewport background color. You can do this in your overlays option. Under background, switch to viewport, and simply change this to the desired color. Much simpler than going into your theme settings. Excellent. Now we can begin morphing our masculine head into a feminine head. We're going to do the same sort of thing by adding a shape key so we can easily see before and after. So add 1 and then 2 shape keys. We'll name the second one woman. And I'm going to change that value up to 1. And now we can begin sculpting. Hit T to bring back my tool panel. And the first thing that I like to change is decreasing the volume of the neck, because anatomically men tend to be more muscular. Before I make any changes, let me enable X symmetry. So I'm going to decrease the size of the neck, starting with the width. Just pull it in with my grab brush. Okay, we want to make it significantly smaller. Also behind the ear, make sure that that comes in to follow suit. Same thing from the side. We'll make it thinner with broad brush strokes. There we go. And definitely smooth out the Adam's apple. I'm using a mouse, so I'm going to switch to my pen. And if the smooth brush by holding shift doesn't really give you what you want fast enough, we can switch to the fill brush. I'm going to decrease the strength. And then that can also help to fill in the details and kind of blur them out, and then smooth. It's not that females do not have Adam's apples. It's just that they're smaller and less defined. So make sure that we do that. Also pull inward the sternocleidomastoid. We're going to decrease the clavicular head. I'm going to use my inflate brush and just push it inward. All right, trying to make these features more subtle. If we zoom in, there's a picture up top. Here's a great example of what the female neck looks like from the front. And also with the curvature, with a male in the trapezius, it has kind of a convex contour, at least with a more muscular man. And with the woman, it curves concave. So let's pull that down in the middle. And this kind of, instead of a harsh corner into the neck, it actually gives it a nice sloping curve in general. Also decrease the volume on the front side of the trapezius, kind of behind the clavicle. So I'm using my inflate brush, holding control and pushing inward to remove some of that volume. I also want the clavicle to be a little more defined here. And smooth out most of the definition. Even though we can see with this person, there is some ridges and valleys in here. But I don't want it to look like, you know, she's stressing at all, or like her neck is tensed. All right, so let me just finish making this curvature pulled down instead of up. See before and after. All right, pretty big difference in the neck. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. It's not that the neck, you know, I don't want to make that concave. I do want to still have a bit of a convex contour, but just not bumpy like it was for the male. All right, that's better. And now moving up the head into the jaw, just like we talked about earlier, instead of a harsh point, we want to make that more soft. So I'm going to pull up the corner and then pull down the long side of the jaw. All right, now we've got a nice swooping contour. And then one of the most consequential differences I find in between masculine and feminine facial structure is that the jaw tapers with women. So we're going to pull the jaw inward just like we did for the neck and continue that down into the chin, where men tend to have a square face shape and women have more of like a heart or oval shape. So in addition to bringing in the jaw corner, we're going to bring out the cheek, the zygomatic process. Okay. So one of the most important angles for a woman is this 3/4 view. You want to see this taper coming down, and you don't want it to be wobbly like this. You want it to be pretty smooth. So this means we need to smooth out the laugh line. We don't really want that to be as defined. So I've got my fill brush here. We'll fill that in, smooth all this back, take down some of the volume. And yeah, a lot of the smooth brush comes into play here. All right, so let's take a look. You can see here the oval shape in a woman's face, and this one too. Very evident, the extended cheekbones and tapered jaw from this angle. That's one of the biggest differences I find between men and women. Although perhaps I got a little too overzealous with that. Maybe pulled out the cheekbones a little bit too much. There we go. Now, right back to the labiomental sulcus like we talked about earlier. Instead of this harsh crease, let's use the fill brush. Fill that in and give it a nice smooth divot rather than the sharp crease. All right, from the side, make that less square. Again, very, very smooth features. All right, and same thing with the labiomarginal sulcus or the marionette line. We're going to fill that in, make it less defined. And so when we make things less defined, it's not that we're removing the anatomy, we're just downplaying it. Whereas for masculine, we want to exaggerate that. So it's definitely important that all the same anatomy is there. It's just depends on the level of definition. All right, so kind of smoothing that out. That looks better. Let's see a before and after. Right, so this is the majority of the differences in my opinion. Seeing that very square masculine face shape transition into the more oval heart shape. Taper in the jaw, extension of the cheekbones. In my opinion, that does way more for a feminine aesthetic than all the changes we're going to make to the mouth, nose, and eyes. But there still are some changes that lean towards feminine. So, for example, the bottom lip, we're going to get rid of these peaks and make it a nice smooth contour, right? Following that principle of curvy and soft. Maybe bring the lips down, give them a little bit more volume on the bottom and the top. Use the inflate brush to plump them a little bit more. And then maybe bring inward the corners of the mouth. All right, another word that comes to mind is petite. And so we'll carry this now into the nose by making it thinner. If we look at some of the photos like this person again, very, very thin nose and smaller, more downplayed nostrils. So let's do that. Pull it in horizontally. Maybe with my pinch brush, I'll just make a couple strokes on the nostril so they are now smaller themselves. Maybe thin out the alar crease, just downplay it a little bit. Also smooth out the laugh line. Leave a little bit there right in the corner where it touches the nostril, but definitely smooth it out. Holding shift, just smoothing out the features around it. Maybe let's lengthen the nose and kind of bring down the mouth. Maybe a little too far. There we go, I think that's good. Now from the side of the nose, again, I don't find that these tweaks to the nose, mouth, and eyes are terribly consequential. The more I study these features between men and women, I really see these features almost interchangeably. Whereas all these same tweaks that we're making to the nose could fit on a masculine face completely naturally. But I do like to make the bridge of the nose a concave contour rather than convex. Have the nose kind of turned up. That also helps, but very, very slight tweak. Maybe thin the front of the nose. Thin and smooth it out. Also from the side view, it looks like I can bring out the vermilion border of the top lip. Bring that out a bit. It's kind of flat for some reason. And I think the top lip's kind of getting away from me a little bit in terms of believability. So let's bring that up. Okay, that looks better. And now into the eyes, really these do not change very much. All of the features need to be as distinct between masculine and feminine. You know, we can perhaps smooth out the inferior palpebral fold, make that a little more subtle, but I do not want to smooth out the superior palpebral fold or decrease the volume of the superior orbital fat. In fact, I'm going to just plump that out a little bit more. You know, maybe smooth the definition just ever so slightly, but really, I don't find the eyes changing much in their definition or really their shape. They both can kind of have the same features. Really where the distinction happens is with eye makeup. And, you know, like the length of the eyelashes, perhaps. But I will continue up into the brow, kind of smoothing out these lines, kind of the furrowed brow. You know, still carrying on lightly with that principle of downplayed features. Maybe bring up the outside of the eyebrow, just give it more of a curve. And yeah, I think that that's about it. Let's do a before and after slide. So masculine into feminine. And you notice I haven't touched the ears at all because those features especially, I don't find any difference between male and female. Maybe add some earrings, but the anatomy is very much the same, I think interchangeably between both. So we'll leave that as they are. And the last thing that I want to offer you is we talked about how hair can do a lot for a masculine or feminine aesthetic. And so I made some hair proxies for you to garnish your sculptures. Once you've applied the shape differences, you can preview masculine and feminine hairstyles. So first we've got hair female A, and these are simple objects that you can move around in object mode to make sure that they fit on your head, scale them as you need. And if your head is anatomically reasonable, then it should fit. And so just as an example, since this one kind of fit perfectly, let's say if this is the situation you run into, you reveal the hair proxies and your head is much smaller. You're going to want to line it up from the side so that you have, you know, a decent gap between the edge of the hair and the scalp. And then if we look from the front, definitely want to line that up and keep an eye on the ears, right? So we have the hair protruding through the ear on that side, not on the other side. So let's move it in X, and it's protruding on both, but it seems to be in the middle. So maybe we'll scale it down, move it down so that we don't have any protrusion. There we go. So this looks about right. And now we've got a nice preview of a hairstyle. There's also another female hairstyle for previewing purposes. We also have a couple men's hairstyles. So let's switch back to the masculine facial structure. That's a male hair A, male hair B, and additionally we've got some facial hair. So you've got a beard as well as a mustache. So definitely use these, play around with them. Again, they're a garnishment. Don't add these too early. I would recommend sculpting the shape differences without the hair. That way the hair is not a crutch for you, because only applying a woman's hairstyle to any head is not a good indicator if you've achieved that structural feminine aesthetic. Again, that takes place in the sculpture itself, but hopefully that comes in handy. It is actually a lot of work to sculpt these proxies or to model them, geometric hair proxies. So I wanted to give those to you so you could avoid that headache. And that is going to conclude the male versus female facial structure. Hopefully those guidelines will make it easier for you to achieve either one. And I will see you in the next lesson.